and welcome to our session on should the UK ban social media for under 16s, a very topical session that we've got happening today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Anderson and I am the Chief Executive here at the Digital Property Alliance. We are planning today to have a debate presenting both sides of the coin around discussions on the social media ban. However, unfortunately, one of our panelists has been delayed. So we're going to kick off with the fantastic Paddy Crump, who is going to talk us through a little bit around some of the concerns that a number of organisations and individuals have around social media. We are then also going to hear from Matthew Scott, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Kent, who is going to talk us through the benefits of such a ban to online safety and supporting children. I think we're having some minor technical difficulties getting Matthew onto the call because I can see he has now arrived. Whilst we sort those out, Paddy, could you just give a brief introduction to yourself and FlipGen?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's incredible to be here. So I'm campaigns director at FlipGen, and we're a youth-led digital wellbeing organization aimed at empowering the next generation to build a better relationship with the digital world. So we do that through conversation, regulation, and education. And obviously this is more centered around the regulation side. So we have a campaign, but we also have school workshops and a toolkit um, where we it's all from a young person's perspective, basically what we wish we'd known when we got a phone.
Fantastic. Um, Whilst we just work through our technical difficulties, what I'm going to say next is if you are watching us live, please do drop a message into the chat. I can see Swain has already anticipated what I'm about to say. Drop a message in the chat. Let us know who you are, whereabouts you are dialing in from, whether that's in the UK or further afield, and also what organisation you are representing. We're all up for having a lively chat on the go, so do feel free to share thoughts and opinions as we move through. We also have a Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of Zoom, down at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to take as many questions as we can towards the end of this session. So as we're going through, don't feel the need to wait. Do drop questions into the chat and then we will come to those once we've reached the end of the set piece element of that. And I can see that Matthew is just joining us now. So Matthew, if you can hear us, because I think we've got your sound and vision hopefully on the way, it would be great to just get a brief introduction from yourself as well. I'm guessing we're still facing technical difficulties, which is ever the irony. We are the Digital Poverty Alliance. We talk a lot about digital and technology. And of course, digital is something that often lets many people down in terms of tech support. Whilst we get that sorted out, Paddy, I'm going to come to you with our first question. So this whole debate around children and young people having access to social media has very quickly moved from wider public concern to an incredibly active policy discussion. Before we start looking at possible solutions either way, what do you see as the central problem that the UK is trying to solve?
Yeah, it's so difficult because the digital world has now it's now part of every single aspect of young people's lives. And I think the central aspect is and the central problem is that regulation has just not kept up with the enormous change in the digital world. Um, the best time to be having these debates about what we do with social media and what functions we allow for under 16s and what functions we don't was 20 years ago. But things have changed so fast, and things only we only talk about things once they become a problem, when really the best time to do it um was before we realized it was a problem. There's the Online Safety Act took, I think, 8 years to really be put in place, and it's just too long. In those 8 years, so much has changed. If you look at kind of 10 years ago, the difference, we didn't like deep fakes were just something that university professors studied. TikTok wasn't around. AI was this kind of phenomenon. There was no chat GPT. Um, and now if we look 10 years further forwards, nobody can predict what's going to happen. And so that's a key problem. While technology has continued to change and harmed young people, regulation and governments have struggled to keep up.
And I feel like this is a wider point right now. Actually, there is so much technological development. It's really, really difficult for policymakers to keep up with that. Traditionally, within the UK, actually, it tends to take quite a long time for bureaucracy to kind of, keep up with technological change. But the pace of that change is so super fast now.
Mm.
Um, can we, and I'm turning to Joel, who is behind the scenes for the DPA, can we launch our poll? So what I'd love to do is just get a bit of a pulse check of how people feel about this debate of the social media ban before we actually start getting into it. So you should have that appear on your screen right now. You can vote in favour, you can vote in opposition, or you can abstain from it. So if you could just pick one of those boxes that, broadly speaking, you align most with, or abstain if you prefer. What we're going to do is launch this again at the end, and it's going to be really interesting to see whether there's any change or whether there's absolutely no change whatsoever. Um, Fantastic. And we now have Matthew on as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Matthew, could I ask you to just give a really brief introduction to your interest in this, and again to also respond to the question about the swift move of this being a sort of matter of public discussion into a really active policy discussion?
No, thank you for the invitation and apologies for the technical issues. It always fills me with confidence coming to a tech debate when policing can't get its technology right and causes problems with Zoom, etc. So I apologise. It's our end, not yours. So I've been involved in this campaign for some time. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner in Kent, and I've long advocated for smartphone-free schools, but also a ban on social media for the under-16s. And it is for a number of reasons. And I first became interested in this debate reading the works of Jonathan Haidt on the anxious generation, having charted over the last 15 years the growing impact of social media upon the mental health and well-being of our young people, as well as all of the impacts that it's having on our society more widely. So why would a police and crime commissioner be interested in restricting social media? It sounds a bit Big Brother, but no, we are seeing an increasing number of cases of crime now where the under-16s are either becoming involved with or being targeted by criminals. We know something about crime at the moment. Last year, we recorded 1,800 offences where the victim was under the age of 16 and the perpetrator was under 16. And it wasn't just some of the really serious issues that we are already experiencing with the sharing of indecent images. Through social media, we are seeing young people who are becoming victims of extortion, of blackmail, and many other serious offences, including stalking and harassment, as well as malicious communications. So in my view, I think that a ban would help us in policing as well as wider society in order to tackle a problem, because we know the social media giants aren't. They don't want to. It is not in their financial interests to do so. They are opposed to anything which would impact upon their ability to generate more users. And I believe that if we have that ban in place, it can be done in such a way as to make our young people even safer. So, for the reasons of the mental health and well-being, the impact that we're seeing upon crime, and also what that means for our future, I think it's the right thing to do. But there is a contradiction. When we are, and I think Jonathan Haidt, to come back to him just to conclude, I think got this right. In our physical space around our children, we wrap them in cotton wool. They're precious to us. They are our they are so precious to us. We wrap them in cotton wool. We won't let them do certain things, yet we'll give them a mobile phone and just let them crack on. We just let them get on with it. And I think there is also a role for parents to play alongside the band to make sure it is being done properly, because we are at complete odds on this. In many respects, it's safer to be out in the natural environment than it's ever been. But at the same time, online, we have got Roblox being used as a portal for paedophiles to target our children. We've got young people being exploited via Snapchat in order to undertake crimes for county lines drug dealers and other issues, as well as extortion and the distractions of WhatsApp. So for a ban, I think it is the right thing to do. I understand there are concerns from others about what this might mean for the dark web, etc., but we think we've got to be bold enough to make the first step and address these other issues alongside it. The concern should not be a reason for inaction.
That's really helpful, Matthew. And I think actually some of that is quite hard hitting. It's not necessarily the dialogue that we all have day to day. It's not what we want to think happens on Instagram or Facebook when people are looking at some of these services. Paddy, you take a very different view. Why do you believe a ban isn't the right response? What approach would you put forward instead?
Yeah, I just start by saying I have the utmost respect for everybody in this debate. I think ultimately we all want the same thing, whether it's me, Matthew, anybody, campaigning for a ban or no ban. We want young people to be safer online, and I think there's broad agreement that the way that the online world works right now is not safe, and the status quo must change. But I think that the ban isn't the right option for two main reasons. Number one, I don't think it will work. I was at an event with year sixes, so 10, 11-year-olds last or a couple of weeks ago, and they can name five different VPN companies off the top of their head. Young people are tech savvy and they will make their way online. They will find a way to use social media platforms, whether we ban it or not. Social media platforms ostensibly have a ban or have a limit of over 13s. Yeah, I think research suggests 40% of under 13s have social media. So if we can't um, ensure that the age limits that are there in place at the moment are working, then I'm not sure how we can ensure that the same can happen if we impose a limit for over 16s. And secondly, I think it will be detrimental to young people. It's not just a dark web that young people get pushed into. It is these other platforms. It is less regulated platforms than social media. Matthew mentioned Roblox, and there is a debate of where social media starts and finishes. It's not in the 10 that are banned in Australia. It's not classed as a social media platform by a lot of people, yet um, it obviously has all the same risks and sometimes more than the social media platforms. So I think when we talk about a social media ban, we've got to look at what we do ban and what we don't ban, and um, Roblox and some of these other platforms that aren't classed as social media are just as harmful. Um, and and by banning social media, those young people who do follow the ban will get pushed into them, and I think that that is going to be really, really harmful to the young people, especially because young people will know they're not meant to be on these platforms, and and there's a stigma around it, so that if something does go wrong, they'll be less likely to talk to their parents rather than more likely.
And I feel like actually a lot of that plays into existing debates around actually how parents receive support to be able to curate their child's online journey, whether that's social media, whether it's Roblox, whether it's anything else that you might be able to find through Google, actually that lack of parental support is something that really shines through in a lot of the research that we do. Coming back to you, Matthew, those in favour of a ban often argue that the current system is just not giving children enough protection. I think, broadly speaking, most of the people on this call would agree with that. But where do you feel the present approach is falling short most seriously?
I think in part it's the fact that, and Paddy made a good point about the fact that we have age restrictions of a sort at the moment on some of these platforms, but they're generally not enforceable. The Online Safety Act made some good progress in taking the fight to these companies around age verification, but ultimately a lot of these companies are able to just carry on, and that's why I think we need to be more stricter. But in addition to that, I would say that things like a ban in isolation isn't the only way that you're going to do that. You have to take a multifaceted approach. I would have the ban, but also we do need to do a lot more to educate parents on the risks that these devices are causing for young people, because Paddy's quite right. There will be those who will naturally follow the ban. There will be those parents who already will naturally follow it. The challenge is how you get to those who won't or don't care. And there are a number of those. We see them all the time. So we need to make sure that we have the ban in place, but you also need to make sure that there's education sitting alongside it and some kind of action that will be taken if it's discovered that people are using these social media uh, problems. And I think, in addition, part of the problem is that for too long, government of all colours was just too scared to take on big tech. We've had members of the TikTok staff who've worked at Number 10, a former deputy prime minister who went to work on for Meta. These big tech companies have a significant amount of influence, and therefore I think that we need. The problem is that big tech has gone unchallenged for too long. Now, I think one thing that could help change is the fact that in the United States last week, two separate cases where the big tech companies were found against for social media addiction. The approach falls short because the NHS has only recently got new guidance on screen time for young people. Before there was barely any. So there are a number of things that we need to do. Prevention and education are just as good as enforcement. So we need those steps. Educate parents, make sure the guidance is there, but actually we need someone, excuse me, with the backbone to stand up to big tech and say enough's enough.
And I feel like the findings from those cases last week, actually, those are going to have wide ramifications, hopefully, in terms of how the tech sector will choose to regulate itself when it comes to social media, but also in actually really kicking off a debate about what people are experiencing when they think they're just jumping on an app. But what does that algorithm actually drive? What does that actually mean for people in terms of that addiction? Paddy, coming back to you, those against a ban often argue that there are deeper problems that lie elsewhere, and I think we're sort of all starting to touch on this. In your view, what's the crucial bit that's being missed when the discussion centers mainly on access to social media?
I think the crucial bit, and I think the bit we're all missing, I think it's a very I don't think it's ambitious enough just to ban it and focus on access it. We miss the fact that, you know, this is not just a problem that affects under 16s. Banning it won't help 17, 18, 40, 50-year-olds who see these negative things online. And it is so focused on young people, but actually this is an issue that covers everybody. Um, I know people who in their 40s, 50s who've seen things online that they wish they hadn't, who say that they're addicted and wish they could put their phones down. So I think it misses a wider point that these technologies are not just impacting young people, they're impacting everybody. And I think that this kind of the debate around the ban kind of takes all the oxygen out of the room and halts the momentum or not just a debate, but implementing a ban, take some momentum away from these wider reforms that we I think we all agree we need to see. Um, the kind of idea that the ban or restricting access to certain people will solve the wider issue, I think is really flawed and actually can have a detrimental impact on everybody else because it takes the onus away from the social media platforms to continue improving their platforms. And as I mentioned before, this is a wider issue than just social media. Gaming platforms, we need to look at chatbots, AI companions, gambling platforms. These are all issues that are having a negative impact. And I think we need to be more ambitious as civil society, but also government and as society in general, and say we don't just want to kind of help people under 16 with one small issue with social media or one. It is a big part of the issue, but let's widen the scope, have a look at everything rather than just focusing on this one thing. And let's be ambitious and really try and make the whole of the digital world safe rather than just social media.
And it is a really difficult question. Where does social media start and finish? Is YouTube social media when it's also where you find so much in terms of educational resources that are used by schools? So that there is that difficulty. And there's a really interesting point from Ricky in the chat that the language doesn't help. There has got to be a better word than ban, restrict, regulate, protect. Um, Really, this is a question to both of you. So MPs rejected that proposed ban on under 16s using social media. It's now gone back to the Lords, and the Lords have voted in favour again. The government is consulting on wider measures, so there's various pilots happening. There's discussion about sort of different age-based restrictions, stronger enforcement. Does that feel like a sensible way forward? Does it leave too much unresolved? Does it give you hope? Does it feel like it's not getting where it needs to get?
I'll go first if that's all right. I appreciate the point that's being made, and a ban is one part of the solution. We've got to look at this from end to end. The fact that 2 in 5 children under the age of 3 have their own tablet and have problems with screen time is an issue. The fact that we have young people in WhatsApp groups which are sending each other thousands of WhatsApp notifications a day is a problem. I don't understand why year fives and year sixes need WhatsApp groups. I go into schools and ask them why, and they just send junk to each other all the time. There was one head teacher in South Gloucestershire who blogged about a child who left their mobile phone device in the locker in school overnight. This was a year six pupil, I believe. They came back to their phone 15 hours later with 9,000 WhatsApp notifications. Now, assuming that they did get 8 hours sleep, that's one notification every 3 seconds. Every 3 seconds. So there is a wider conversation that we need to have about what is appropriate use, how much is too much, and how we look at it in the round. A ban is a part of that, but we need to look at it from an early years. So we look at young people quite rightly because the impact of social media and their development starts from the very beginning. How much interaction a parent has with their child is really important. And in some circumstances, some parents, a small number, are basically abdicating their responsibilities to devices and leaving their child stuck in front of screens. There are kids who turn up at school unable to sit up because they lie on the sofa with a tablet all day and they have no core strength. There are some really extreme examples of where we need to get this right at a really young age so that it doesn't become an issue further on. And also that there's the wide variety of things which young people are being targeted for. We have got not just the extortion, the county lines gangs, the paedophiles, etc., but we've got the misogynists. We've got misogynists and these manosphere types who are targeting young boys, aiming to be creatures that they look up to. In some circumstances, they are the ones those young boys do look up to, which is quite troubling, and we need to. That's why places like YouTube need to be factored into a ban like this, because they're copying all the same functions of the other social media platforms. They have shorts, which is like Reels and TikToks from everywhere else. Viewing time and likes, etc., are encouraged, and they help you become creators. So the scope needs to be relatively wide. I mean, Roblox, we both mentioned earlier. Why do children under the age of 13 need a gaming platform where they can talk to each other and where adults can pretend to be children? There is no real need for it. There is more that we can do, and educating adults is a part of that. That's educating adults in terms of their responsibilities as a parent, but also those in terms of what they are sharing as well. But I think the ban needs to be a key part of that. There needs to be some regulation of what is happening for young people. It goes back again. If something were happening in a physical space, we would do something about it. Street lighting, CCTV, police patrols. The web, the web itself is a completely unregulated mess. We don't have digital policemen online who are able to go in on patrol and do this kind of thing. So we need to take other steps, such as this. An interesting question Emily posted in the chat actually around penalties for circumventing the ban is a really interesting one, because I mean, again, that's one of the things you would look at around the burden of proof. Because a parent would go, oh, they downloaded it themselves. Well, I've given them my password. They've downloaded it themselves, abdicating then responsibility for the action. So there are things like that you would have to consider. But I think the penalties should be on the social media companies for allowing the young people in the first place, and meaningful penalties. If you don't comply, you get switched off.
Yeah,
Gavin.
just kind of following on from that. I think it's really important that we are having this conversation, and I think that I'm totally in support of a wide-ranging consultation and a national conversation, as long as it's is a national conversation, is wide-ranging. We haven't ever had a sit and stock take as a society of what is going on with social media in the digital world. If you look at EdTech and Google Classroom, it kind of just came in through COVID, and we never really sat down and made a decision that this is what we do allow, this is what we don't allow. And I think that's a really important thing to do. And I don't agree with the ban. And I think again, I think that we're really limiting ourselves by saying ban or no ban. Um, and also, I think that this point around kind of abdicating responsibility, yes, there are times when parents do give their phone, but it's really difficult now. I think that social clubs, the funding into youth services has gone down by 73% in a generation. And we've got to look at society, and social media has become a key part. Gaming has become a key part of young people socializing. And if we do ban these things, if we do ban social media, if we do ban gaming, what is there for young people to do? You can say that society and the outside world is much safer than ever before, but that's not the culture anymore. It's not a culture where widespread, where you can go and knock on your friend's door and play until the street lights come on. Um, I think we've got to look at the reality of how society has changed since the social media has come in 20 years ago. Um, and actually, for a lot of people, giving a tablet or giving their young people in their lives a phone is when they can get like things done, and I'm not saying it's the right thing, but I think that it's a societal issue, and I'd kind of stay away from like blaming the parents themselves, um, because um, you know there is that lack of outside opportunity, lack of outside space, lack of other places to go, and I think that that needs to be part of any review and any consultation we do, um, is looking at how the offline impacts the online.
And I think there's also a really interesting point raised by Gavin in the chat, that we sort of all accept this age 13 age limit, which is in fact a weird artifact, as Gavin says, of US data law, and it's not linked to developmental access or educational access or any other kind of considerations. And it brings us back potentially to a really important point, which is that the UK is actually a really small place compared to other large nations around the world. So the level of influence that we can have on social media companies within the UK is actually potentially quite limited. Um, so Matthew, coming back to you, a concern that is often raised, and in fact Paddy raised it earlier on, is that a ban may just push some children to move to less visible or less regulated spaces online. How do you think that risk should be addressed? You are on mute.
It was going to happen eventually, wasn't it? Being stuck on mute. And look, and that is always the risk. That is always a risk, but it's always the risk which is used when deployed as an argument not to do something. We should ban this, but it will just push people to do that. We restrict the sale of this drug, it will just people to do that. And I don't think that that should necessarily be an inhibitor to us actually being bold enough to do something. And I think that working with the parents, working with the children and with schools, and there's a really good point made in the chat about the loss of early years services. I think it's, the loss of things like Sure Start as a place for educating and working with and learning from, I think has helped contribute towards the problem. That lack of support network for new parents has been a big loss. And that's, and we're seeing that articulated, particularly around you can map the age groups of young people who are becoming involved in crime based on when they were born, what social factors were in place. So I think that regulating the dark web is one of those things that would need to be addressed. But I think that's where you probably need to give policing more responsibilities and more funding to tackle such problems. We have, for example, when tackling child sexual exploitation online, funded paedophile online investigation teams. And if we are pushing people onto a dark web where there is crime and antisocial behaviour, then there needs to be more investment for the policing side of it to be able to monitor such activities. Now, I come back to what I said at the beginning. There are reasons not to do something, but I think we need to be bold enough generationally to take the step now, as others are doing.
And I'm very pleased to say I've never been on the dark web. I don't intend to go on the dark web, and I don't want to find out how to go on the dark web. But evidently, children are finding that knowledge and information somewhere. And I might hazard a guess that it may be social media is where people are actually finding out and learning how to be able to access some of those services. Paddy, a sort of matching concern about not pursuing a ban is that it may leave children exposed while wider reforms take place, while conversations happen. How would you respond to that concern?
I I mentioned it earlier. I think that if we took the step to ban, and it's often kind of an argument used that it's the precautionary. If social media is causing so much harm, why don't we just ban it until we can sort ourselves out? But I'd argue there are two key points against that. The one, as I mentioned earlier, is where are young people going if they're not on social media? I think that a lot of the calls for a social media ban are kind of nostalgia driven, and the kind of idea that young people will spend those extra 2 hours that they're on TikTok playing outside of their friends, using jumpers as goalposts in a park and running around fields, but that's just not society anymore. Um, if we don't control and we don't offer positive alternatives, we can't control where young people are going to go, and that means that the kind of unregulated spaces and gaming is going to increase. Roblox, Australian children are the biggest users of Roblox in the world, and I think that kind of represents how, this displacement. And secondly, I think the issue with um, doing a doing a ban and banning under 16s is, as I mentioned, it takes all the momentum away from all the other reforms that we want. Um, it takes the onus off social media platforms to actually improve the safety of their platforms by design. If they just ban it, it kind of takes that onus away. And I don't believe that if we ban social media for under 16s this year, I don't believe that next year there'll be more of the wider ranging reforms that we need to see. I don't believe that it will be the start of the journey. I think many people, including the platforms, will see it as the end of the journey. And I think for a lot of platforms, they're in a win-win. The early results from Australia, and it's very hard to kind of be conclusive, but that young people will continue to use the platforms whatever way they can, whilst also social media companies won't have that onus on them to make it safer for those under 16, so they win either way. And that's why I kind of advocate for wider ranging reforms now before a social media ban. And by all means, if we've talked about enforcement, if we put things in place, we put laws in place, we put regulations in place to make social media safe by design, and social media platforms don't follow them and continue acting the way they're doing, then by all means we need to look at wider enforcement and actually limiting platforms access to under 16s. But I think as a start, we need to look at those wide-ranging reforms and be really ambitious with what we can achieve.
And that really importantly takes us on actually to the next question, which is around enforcement, because wherever you stand on this, enforcement of either existing rules or potential new rules or the Online Safety Act or making platforms less addictive, how we're going to enforce that is the absolute crux of the issue. So if the UK were to tighten restrictions, what would a credible and proportionate system need to look like in practice? And Matthew, I'm going to come to you first from that kind of policing and crime perspective.
I think first and foremost, the enforcement should fall on the social media company. It's I don't agree that they won't be motivated in order to make their things safe by design, because you can do that at the same time. It's it's sad. I mean, I agree with Ricky that that we're making tech and screens a place where they're just normalized now, and that children aren't going outside, and then they're not going to playgrounds, and they're not kicking a football around. It's not it's not nostalgia. There, we have created this monster, and this is what young people are growing up with now, and we need to take responsibility for that. Um, I, I yeah, I mean, look, I think the real enforcement needs to fall at the end of the social media companies. They should be subject to heavy fines, and if there is systematic abuse of the process, then the company should have their access to this country restricted totally. Unless you hit them hard, they're not going to listen, full stop. And I think that you could do other things. You could force them to publish their algorithms. You could force them to do all sorts of things. We've got to remember we have a government that is sovereign in this country and can make laws along those lines. We've got to be tough on the social media companies. We've got to work with parents to make it better. There is a massive growing movement of parents who all want the same thing now. The hundreds of thousands of people who have signed the Smartphone Free Childhood Parent Pact, the parents who are writing to their schools to make them smartphone free, and schools are listening to at least take the screens away during the school day to counter the act of EdTech. So I think the burden falls on the social media companies. I don't think that by taking the responsibility away from them by putting the ban in place, because there's still so much more that can be done in order to make it enforceable and also to make them take account for their actions.
And Paddy, same question to you.
Yeah, I agree that the platforms that the burden should sit with them. Um, it is it can be. I understand why people see it as sad that social media that young people can't survive without social media, but I think I'm not, and I'm not saying that this should be the case. What I am saying is that um 20 years ago, when social media didn't exist and a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old wasn't used to connecting with their friends via social media, wasn't used to hearing about what's going on in their town via social media, it would be much easier to remove social media from them. But now there is the I know my mum would not let me leave the house without a phone now, or would be very unhappy now, or 5 years ago she wouldn't have let me. So I think that in that way society has shifted, but enforcement must um, sit with and the owners must sit with social media companies. Um, but I think again, um, social media companies that they can't be trusted with limiting their platforms to over 13. So I'm not sure how we can do it for over 16s. Um, but I would come back to the fact that I'd be more than happy we talk however you call it, a ban or restriction, for platforms to be restricted access to under 16s if they don't follow safety by design, and if they don't try to make their platform safer, because at the end of the day, that has to be a kind of um, the consequence for their actions. Um, but I do think that that onus will be taken away from them if a ban comes in, and that there is no incentive at that point to make their platform safer for everybody.
And of course, there's the interesting question, which I've seen in sort of other debates and other written pieces around that differential between taking away social media from children and young people who have it now versus protection of future generations. So, children and young people who are still too young to have it or haven't even been born yet, and whether this is something that's better for those people so that they're not in a world where actually everything happens through social media. Um, I'm really conscious of time and the fact that we probably have more questions in the Q&A than we've ever had on any other previous DPA webinar. So I'm going to ask panelists to just keep responses really short for these, just a couple of last questions. Matthew, if a ban were to be introduced, what early signs would you be looking for that would tell you it was making a meaningful difference?
I think there's a few things. Obviously, the one indicator that I can look at is crime numbers. You know, we've got a growing number of crimes taking place online, including those which are reported to the police or those which are mentioned to the schools. I think over time, the distraction which social media and smartphones cause would be reflected potentially in behaviour and scores at schools. There are a number of ways in which you could advocate for success, but also the and again, one of the reasons to do it is that actually you start to hear from the social media companies themselves that reducing numbers of users means reducing amount of advertising revenue, because everything they do, everything is for them is about money. They don't give two hoots. They don't give two hoots about social media safety. They only care about their bottom line. They only care about how much advertising revenue and subscriptions and other things that we can things. But there are lots of different ways in which you can measure this. I've listed a few.
Fantastic, thank you. And Paddy, if a ban isn't introduced, but there are alternative approaches, what early signs would you be looking for to see a bit of a shift in terms of online safety for children?
It's such a difficult question. I don't think it has an easy answer. Either way, I think it's very difficult to measure whether a ban works or whether a ban or whether any other policy works, because this is social media is so ingrained in society and amongst young people that it's um, going to be, it's not an overnight fix, and there aren't kind of those indicators tomorrow. Um, I think that we've got to kind of, it's going to be more qualitative stuff, and I think this is one of the issues with people talking about not banning and um, other types of policies, that it's much more difficult to measure that success. With banning, you can measure how many accounts have been taken down, and those numbers look really good. But actually, are these the actual metrics that are making a difference? And I think that you know the early stages of knowing whether other reforms are working, other policies like safety by design, um, not having autoplay and friction, is actually just talking to young people. They're the ones experiencing it day to day, talking to people. Um, and seeing whether their experiences change rather than looking at big statistics. You have to talk to a lot of people, but that's what I'll be interested in. Um, that there probably won't be any metrics this year, next year about the change, but hopefully if we get the anecdotal evidence and then look at the wider picture in a few years' time, then that could be the best way to measure.
Thank you. And of course, this does link into a much, much wider conversation. There's a lot on the chat around smartphones. Matthew's referenced sort of smartphone-free childhood. The DPA, as a digital inclusion charity, does not provide smartphones for use by under 16. So we believe that keyboarded devices are the most appropriate way for children to be able to access their education. But of course, there's so much else that is now reliant on smartphone access these days. So it becomes a very interlinked conversation. I'm going to draw our set piece questions to a close and move on to some of the questions in the Q&A. And we're probably in the next 12 minutes not going to get through all of them. So we'll try and be pacey with our responses to some of these questions. Something that has come up a lot, and I'm going to bring together a couple of questions, is around children who may be vulnerable in one way or another. So Lucy has asked, how might a blanket ban for under 16s be compatible with corporate parenting duties? For many children in care, social media is the thread of continuity through repeated loss, placement, schools, relationships. How can a policy that removes one of those few stable connections in their lives be justified as safeguarding? Matthew, would you have a view on that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. The question I'd pose back is obviously my concern around social media and smartphones is what is it that a smartphone does that a brick phone can't do? And there are a number of devices which do allow communication with different individuals via telephone calls and via text messages, and a number of other limited functions. So what social media platforms are they using which is enabling that connection? That's the key. And what worries me is that what we do tend to see is, unfortunately, is that vulnerable children are ones often being targeted for exploitation too. So could it be that a different type of device other than a smartphone could be the alternative? And I pose that as a question.
And I think it's a really interesting and important point. What is the right kind of device actually for children of different ages to be using to maintain that connection? Another attendee points out that for LGBTQIA plus children who are massively reliant on social media for a sense of belonging, where will they go if there is a ban, and how do they find that sense of connection? And I think what you're really saying is it always through an app on a smartphone that needs to happen?
Yeah, potentially.
Paddy, a question for you from Luke Karma. The government has historically failed to eliminate bias and misinformation in traditional press. Some people do argue that children will be driven underground, but the internet was, in Luke's view, far less dangerous before mass market social media platforms existed. So why are these household names trusted to be safe when clearly they're not? And with that in mind, how would you justify allowing children to have access to those at all?
I think, yeah, on the first point of the first point, I think I couldn't see the question. But first of all, I think I'd say that um, justify having access. One of my key issues with the ban is that young people will still have access anyway. Um, putting this ban in place is not a magic silver bullet that will just. There's no way to stop under 16s from accessing social media if they really want to. Young people are tech savvy. Um, as I said before about the VPNs, I think there's a poll that's been done that 50% of parents would help their children get past the social media ban. So I think that it's kind of um, I don't believe so. The answer to your second part of the question is how can we justify allowing children to access them at all? Um, I don't believe there's a way to stop children accessing them, and I believe that the way to make it safer for children who are accessing them, whether which shall access them, whether there's a ban or no ban, is through safety by design. And the kind of the top part of the question about um, how governments has historically failed to eliminate bias and misinformation. A ban on 16 on under 16-year-olds is also government legislation, and it would be coming in as regulation. So I think the question is for any of us, whether it's the policies that I am proposing, the policies that Matthew's proposing, these are all coming from would be all be coming from the government. So I think it's a question in general for everybody, whether you believe in a ban or not, is how can we ensure that whatever policies are put in place um, are effective and implemented and enforced.
And another attendee asks about those with low digital skills, which of course is a big concern for us at the DPA. As one example, we did some research with families who'd benefited from our schemes where children would receive a laptop to support their education. And 40% of parents reported that actually their child didn't know how to use a search engine, such as Google, but they would instead look to a social media platform to find information. We know misinformation, particularly on issues like health, is rife around, I think it's 2% of health information on TikTok is actually accurate. The rest is not accurate. So it's with that context, certainly for me, that this is a really interesting question. Does a ban risk putting those with low digital skills into more dangerous places? How could we ensure that under 16s don't look to access social media from other means? Certainly from DPA perspective, I'd question whether those with low digital skills would be the first people jumping to a VPN, a virtual private network, or accessing the dark web or any of these other more dangerous elements. But I'd be really interested in both of your perspectives around that.
It's really, it comes back to a point that I think Tony in the chat made earlier on, is that if they don't have smartphones, then you need to provide alternative digital devices in order to help people learn. And there is, that's a very fair challenge around, you may not push people to other places, but are you disadvantaging them by not enabling them to learn skills elsewhere? And it's probably a conversation I need to have with educators actually around what time they're being enabled at school in order to learn those digital skills, because I think it's a very fair challenge. I don't, I think the point you make around going to social media to find out information is deeply worrying, given it's not just fake information, it's also it's deep fakes, the amount of deep fake information that we're seeing on there, and deep fake videos, AI generated slop that is out there all far too much. And as you say, that the misinformation, there is an awful lot out there that would give cause for concern that they wouldn't be able to access it anyway if there was a ban. But I'd be happy to happy to learn more about what the school's perspective would look like on digital schools and digital digital poverty from that perspective instead.
And certainly our research would say there is nowhere near enough time spent on learning digital skills
Yeah, I
within the
think
classroom.
yeah,
But
I think
that's a
part of
whole
the
other.
problem is I'm also very keen that we don't put the burden onto educators, and I've said that quite a lot with smartphone-free schools and with social media. I see my own kids, their teachers posting us messages at the weekends, getting them late last night about changes to PE timetables, and it concerns me that teachers are having to do that at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night, to tell us about changes to the timetable that we're probably not giving teachers enough time or space anyway to cover the existing curriculum. My daughter's doing times tables in year 3 that I didn't start doing until I was in year 4. Now she's very bright and she does very well, but we didn't even start some of the work that she's doing until I was in year 4, and she is in year 3. So I know how much pressure the school timetable is under, as well as how much pressure the teachers are under to do that as well. So it's probably one area where I probably should have said from the beginning, the onus in this is not to put it onto the teachers and the school timetable. It needs to be holistic. It needs to look at every part of it.
Excellent. And Paddy, did you have a view around that?
Yeah, I just say that I coming back to a question before about vulnerable groups um different types of young people. I think it's really important that all these kinds of individuals are part of the conversation. And just on Matthew's point, looking for information online. I mean, if there's an event, if there's like a gig, if there's a talk, then it's all through social media. Companies um, put all these things out through social media, and I think that we're really limiting um, under 16s involvement um, with society in general if we take social media away. And also there's the issue of votes at 16. And whether we like it or not, young people do get their news from social media, and I think that's also an onus on social media companies and the government to ensure that the news on that site is as accurate as possible. But it's really important that every young person has the ability to learn and is taught and educated about the online world and digital skills. Um, and I'm in massive agreement that that needs to happen more in schools, but that also shouldn't be put on educators. That needs to be part of any regulation that comes into place.
Thank you. A really, really complex discussion, and I'd like to thank everyone, including everyone who has attended today, for being really respectful around the range of very different views that sit on this topic. Um, there are more questions that we're not going to have time to get to today, but certainly a few of them we will pick up with our panelists, including around evidence measures for what worked elsewhere. I'm going to ask Joel to just fire up that poll again so we can take a little temperature check of whether today's debate has changed what people are thinking. So when that little box appears, do pop on there whether you're in favour, whether you're opposed, or whether you still wish to abstain from the debate. An absolutely massive thanks to Matthew and Paddy for giving up their time to be a part of this today and to share very different perspectives around an issue that I think everyone on this call agrees is incredibly important that we find a road through. Particularly as a digital inclusion charity, we take very seriously the fact that we are encouraging people to have access potentially in a way that they haven't had before, and therefore to think about what the best way is to keep their family safe online whilst experiencing the benefits of technology. If this is something you'd like to pick up with us for further conversations, please do let us know. We are actively formulating our response to the consultation at the moment, so we will be sharing more of that very soon. If you have enjoyed today's debate, do make sure that you've signed up for our newsletter at digitalpovertyalliance.org to be part of future webinars. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists to leave us with no more than 10 seconds, no more than 10 seconds. If you were advising ministers directly today, what's the one thing you would most want UK government to do next? So, Matthew.
This is the biggest opportunity you have to protect the physical and mental well-being of young people. We need to put the ban in place now.
Thank you, very clear. And Paddy.
I'd say look at the evidence, speak to as many people as possible, young people from all different areas of society, and make sure you're doing it with an open mind rather than with a pre-existing policy that you want to introduce.
Thank you both. And thank you to everyone for voting. We have an absolute dead heat of 36% in favour, 36% opposing, and 36% abstaining, which does not add up to 100%. We'll work out exactly how Zoom's percentages works, and it probably tells us something interesting about algorithms and reliability of tech. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you on our next webinar soon. Take care.